My hand trembled as I placed the termination letters on their desks. The mahogany surface gleamed under the office lights, the same desks where they'd signed my college tuition checks, and later, the eviction notice that left me homeless too. Hours after my graduation ceremony. I'm Emma Lawson, and 3 years ago, my parents told me I was too ambitious for a woman in finance. They rejected my job application to their firm and kicked me out of their home in one breath. Today, I just became the majority owner of Lawson Capital Partners, and my first executive decision was replacing its founding partners, my father and mother. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The frosted glass doors of Lawson Capital Partners felt heavier than I remembered as I pushed them open, my reflection fragmenting across the surface. The reception area hadn't changed in the 3 years since I'd last walked through here. The same modern furniture and muted grays, the oversized abstract paintings my mother had commissioned from up-and-coming artists she'd met at charity, galas, and the subtle scent of sandalwood that my father insisted conveyed prosperity. Even the receptionist was the same. Marianne looked up, her practiced smile freezing when she recognized me. I watched confusion, then panic cross her face as she took in my tailored charcoal suit, the sleek leather portfolio tucked under my arm, and the visitor's badge I shouldn't have needed in a building that bore my last name. Ms. Lawson, she stammered. We weren't expecting. I mean, your parents are in the quarterly strategy meeting with the board right now. I smiled, not unkindly. Marianne had always been pleasant to me, even after my sudden disappearance from family events. Perfect timing then. 14th floor conference room still? She nodded mutely as I stepped toward the elevator bank, my heels clicking purposefully against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the lobby, drawing curious glances from junior associates hurrying between meetings. 3 years ago, they wouldn't have given me a second look. Just the boss's daughter, given special treatment but never taken seriously. The elevator doors closed silently around me, and for a moment, I was alone with my reflection in the polished steel. I barely recognized myself sometimes. The confident posture, the calculating look in my eyes, the complete absence of the desperate need for validation that had driven me for so long. Success was an excellent makeup artist. It concealed all manner of old wounds. My mind drifted back to graduation day at Princeton. The ceremony had been picture perfect, right down to the cloudless May sky. I'd graduated summa cum laude with dual degrees in finance and data science, a combination my father had initially discouraged. Data science is for the back office, Emma, not for someone who wants a client-facing role. I'd proven him wrong by leveraging both skill sets during my summer internships, creating a proprietary trading algorithm that had caught the attention of several Wall Street firms. The family celebration afterward had been held at Le Bernardin, my mother's choice, naturally. Crystal glasses clinked as relatives toasted my accomplishments, my father beaming with the specific pride of someone who views their child's success as a reflection of their own brilliance. My mother, elegant as always in Chanel, kept a manicured hand on my shoulder as she expertly guided the conversation toward my imminent start date at Lawson Capital. Emma will be joining us in the strategy division, she announced to Uncle Robert, who managed the firm's West Coast operations. Daniel thinks she shows promise in client analytics. A good entry point. I took a sip of champagne, hiding my surprise. This was the first I'd heard of any specific department assignment. I'd submitted my formal application to the firm's rotational analyst program 2 months earlier, the same program every new hire went through, prestigious degree or not. My father had insisted I go through proper channels. No special treatment, he'd said firmly. You need to earn your place like everyone else. I'd respected that, even admired it. What I didn't know then was that the entire application process had been theater, a charade to teach me what they believed was an important lesson in humility. Actually, I said, setting down my glass carefully, I haven't received my official placement yet. I'm hoping for the rotational program to get exposure across divisions. A brief, loaded glance passed between my parents. Uncle Robert, sensing tension, suddenly became fascinated by the dessert menu. "We'll discuss this at home," my father said quietly, his smile never faltering. 3 hours later, I stood in our Upper East Side penthouse living room, still in my graduation dress, staring at my parents in disbelief. "What do you mean my application was declined?" My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. My father, having exchanged his celebratory demeanor for his CEO persona, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. "The hiring committee found your application impressive, but ultimately not the right fit for the program." "The hiring committee," I repeated slowly. "The committee you chair." "I recused myself from your evaluation," he replied smoothly, "for obvious reasons." My mother perched on the edge of our Italian leather sofa, her posture perfect as always. "Darling, this is actually for the best. Working directly under Daniel in strategy means you won't have to waste time in departments that won't serve your long-term career. It's a better opportunity." I shook my head, trying to process what was happening. "So you rejected my application to the program everyone else goes through, but created a special position for me under Dad? How is that no special treatment?" "Emma," my father's voice took on the patronizing tone he used with difficult clients, "there are realities about our business you don't yet understand. The rotational program is for outsiders who need to learn our culture, our methodologies. You've been surrounded by this your entire life." "I wanted to earn my place," I insisted. "On merit, not because I'm a Lawson." My mother sighed, the sound elegant even in its exasperation. "And this childish idealism is precisely why you need guidance. Business isn't a meritocracy, especially not in finance. It's about relationships, influence, and understanding the unwritten rules." I felt something hardening inside me, a realization that had been forming throughout college, but crystallized only in this moment. My parents didn't see me as a professional with skills and potential. They saw me as a legacy to be managed, a piece to be positioned on their board. "I'm declining the strategy position," I said quietly. The silence that followed was absolute. "What did you just say?" My father turned from the window, his expression incredulous. "I'm declining. I'll find another position at a different firm, somewhere I can actually prove myself." My mother stood up, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. "Don't be dramatic, Emma. You're upset, I understand. But throwing a tantrum won't—" "It's not a tantrum," I interrupted, something I'd rarely dared to do before. "It's a professional decision. I won't start my career being handed a position others couldn't even apply for." My father's face darkened. I'd seen that expression directed at underperforming portfolio managers and disloyal employees, but never at me. "If you walk away from this opportunity, don't expect another one. Not from us, not from anyone in our circle." I should have been frightened by the threat. Instead, I felt a strange, unexpected lightness. "Are you saying you'd blacklist your own daughter across the industry?" "I'm saying actions have consequences," he replied coldly. "You've been given every advantage. The best schools, the right connections, a clear path forward. If you're too stubborn to appreciate that, perhaps you need to experience life without those advantages." My mother stepped forward, her voice softening in the way it did when she was about to deliver what she considered reasonable compromise. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Take the night to think about it, darling. Sleep on it, and we'll discuss this again in the morning when emotions aren't running so high." I looked between them. These powerful, polished people who had shaped every aspect of my existence, who had planned my life with the same strategic precision they used to acquire undervalued assets. For the first time, I saw clearly what I would become if I stayed in their orbit. Not myself, but their carefully crafted version of a Lawson successor. "There's nothing to discuss," I said with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "I've made my decision." My father's jaw tightened. "Then you've made your choice. If you're so determined to reject everything we're offering, you can do it on your own terms, with your own resources." "What does that mean?" I asked, though somehow I already knew. "It means," my mother interjected, "that if you're adult enough to dismiss our guidance, you're adult enough to support yourself, completely." "You're kicking me out?" The words hung in the air, surreal in their implication. "On my graduation day?" "We're respecting your decision to be independent," my father corrected, as if the semantics made any difference. "Your trust fund will remain frozen until you're 30, as originally stipulated. We'll give you 2 weeks to find alternative accommodation." My mother added, with what she probably thought was generosity, "The apartment in Murray Hill that grandfather left you still needs renovation, but it's legally yours. You could start there." I almost laughed. The apartment was a dilapidated one-bedroom in an old building my grandfather had purchased in the 1970s. He'd left it to me in his will, bypassing my father, who had wanted to sell it along with the rest of the building. It had been sitting empty for years, deemed too small and unfashionable for family use, but apparently now it was good enough for their disobedient daughter. "I don't need 2 weeks," I heard myself say. "I'll be gone tomorrow." Later that night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed surrounded by evidence of the life they had designed for me. Debate trophies, Ivy League pennants, framed photos from charity events and debutante balls I'd attended only to please them. None of it felt like mine. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I called Miles Zhang, a former classmate whose job offer from Hudson Square Capital I'd declined months earlier in favor of the family firm. He'd been persistent, telling me they were building something special, something different from the old guard firms like my family's. "It's a bit unconventional," Miles had said, "but we're combining quantitative strategies with sustainable investing principles. Your algorithm would be perfect for our emerging markets division." I'd been flattered but loyal to the family plan. Now, at 11 p.m. on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life, I sent him a text. "Is that position still open?" His response came almost immediately. "For you? Always. Call me tomorrow." The weight that had been pressing on my chest since the confrontation with my parents eased slightly. I had options. I had skills. I didn't need their carefully curated path. By 9 a.m. the next morning, I had packed 2 suitcases with essentials and called a car service. My parents were already at the office. No goodbye, no further discussion. Just a manila envelope on the kitchen counter containing the keys to the Murray Hill apartment and a check for $5,000 with final support, written in the memo line in my father's precise handwriting. The amount was insultingly small for a family. Of our wealth, barely enough for a month in New York. The message was clear. This was meant to be a lesson in humility, a temporary banishment until I came crawling back, appropriately chastened and ready to accept their terms. I left the check on the counter, taking only the keys. The Murray Hill apartment was worse than I remembered. Water stains marked the ceiling, the ancient radiator clanked ominously, and the single bathroom featured tiles so old they belonged in a museum. But the bones were good, the pre-war details intact beneath years of neglect. And most importantly, it was mine, free and clear. The one thing they couldn't take away. I dropped my suitcases in the middle of the dusty hardwood floor and pulled out my phone to call Miles back. "I need to ask you something," I said when he answered. "The position you offered, what's the timeline?" "We're looking at a 2-week onboarding for the next cohort," he replied. "Why? Are you actually considering it now?" I looked around at the peeling wallpaper and broken light fixtures. "I am, but I need a month. There's something I need to take care of first." Miles hesitated. A month is pushing it, Emma. What's going on? I thought you were locked into Lawson Capital. Plans change, I said simply. I'll explain everything when I see you, but right now, I need to know if you can hold the position for 4 weeks. For your algorithm and your Princeton connections, I'll make it work, he said finally. But this better be good. It will. I promised, already mentally calculating renovation costs and timelines. I'm about to get a crash course in independence. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of contractors, permit applications, and trips to home improvement stores I'd never set foot in before. I emptied my personal savings, maxed out my credit cards, and sold the designer wardrobe I'd accumulated over years of being the perfect Lawson daughter. Every Chanel bag and Louboutin heel funded another repair to the apartment. I slept on an air mattress, showered at a nearby gym, and learned to stretch grocery money in ways my private school education never taught me. The building's superintendent, a gruff man named Hector, who remembered my grandfather fondly, became an unexpected ally, showing me how to silence the clanking radiator and which contractors wouldn't overcharge a clearly inexperienced young woman. Your abuelo, he was a good man, Hector told me one evening as he helped me install ceiling fixtures. Not like the rest of those suits. He cared about the people who lived here, not just the property values. I learned more about my grandfather in those conversations than I had in my entire life at home, where his eccentric business practices and soft approach to real estate investment had been dismissed as weaknesses by my father. By the time my first day at Hudson Square Capital arrived, the apartment was transformed, not into luxury, but into a clean, functional space that reflected choices I had made. I stood in the center of the small living room, morning light streaming through windows I'd washed myself, and felt a strange pride I'd never experienced in the penthouse full of designer furnishings. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard you're starting at HSC today. Bold move. Lunch sometime? Uncle Robert. I stared at the message, surprised. Uncle Robert had always been the family outlier, more relaxed than my father, more authentic than my mother, running the West Coast office with a style that earned him quiet criticism at family meetings. I'd always liked him, but assumed he'd fall in line with my parents' freeze-out. Sure, I texted back. Next week? My first day at Hudson Square Capital was nothing like I'd imagined starting my finance career. Instead of the corner office, with my name on the door that would have awaited me at Lawson Capital, I was assigned a workstation in an open floor plan, surrounded by other analysts who had no idea who my family was. Instead of clients handpicked by my father to ease me in, I was given a stack of data sets from emerging markets and told to prove that my algorithm could identify sustainable investment opportunities better than their current models. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was real. I worked 14-hour days, coming home to my simple apartment too exhausted to think about the life I'd left behind. The algorithm needed refinements to work with limited data from developing economies, and I threw myself into the challenge, grateful for problems that had actual solutions, unlike the complex tangle of family expectations I'd escaped. When I finally met Uncle Robert for lunch the following week, I chose a casual bistro in Chelsea, nothing like the white tablecloth establishments my parents frequented. He arrived in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but seemed oddly uncomfortable in the restaurant, as if unsure how to navigate a space without a maitre d' fawning over the Lawson name. "You look different," he said after we ordered. "Good different." I smiled, running a hand through hair I now cut myself rather than spending hundreds at my mother's salon. "I feel different." "Your parents are..." He hesitated. "Furious? Disappointed? Waiting for me to fail?" I supplied. "All of the above," he admitted. "Plus, confused. They genuinely don't understand why you walked away." I took a sip of water, considering my response carefully. They offered me something that looked like opportunity, but came with invisible strings. I wanted to build something for myself, not just inherit what they built. Uncle Robert studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. I understand that better than you might think. He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. Listen, Emma, there's something you should know. Things at Lawson Capital aren't what they appear to be. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Your father's leadership style worked in the 90s, even the early 2000s, but the market's evolving. Clients want more transparency, more technological integration, more responsible investment options. He's resistant to all of it. This wasn't entirely surprising. My father's contempt for trendy investment fads, as he called them, was well known within the family. The board is getting restless, Uncle Robert continued. Returns have been flat for 3 quarters. 2 major clients switched to Morgan Stanley last month. Your mother's social connections are keeping some old money clients loyal, but it's not enough. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I was already sensing the answer. He sat back, a faint smile playing at his lips. Because you were right to walk away, but maybe for reasons you didn't fully understand yet. And because I think you might be exactly what the firm needs, just not in the role your parents imagined. I'm happy at Hudson Square, I said automatically. Are you? Or are you proving a point? Uncle Robert shrugged. Either way, keep doing what you're doing. Build your reputation. Show what your approach can accomplish. The finance world is smaller than it seems. Word gets around. As I walked back to my office after lunch, his words echoed in my mind. Was I just proving a point? Was my entire career decision based on rebellion rather than genuine passion? No, I decided as I settled back at my desk, staring at the lines of code that had become my obsession. This was real. The excitement I felt when the algorithm identified patterns hidden to human analysts, the satisfaction of building investment, models that generated returns while supporting sustainable development. This wasn't about my parents anymore. I'd found my own path. 6 months into my role at Hudson Square Capital, my algorithm had helped the firm secure 2 major institutional clients and was generating returns 4% above market benchmarks. Miles had promoted me to lead a small team developing similar models for other emerging markets. My apartment renovations were complete, and I'd even managed to start repaying my maxed-out credit cards. I hadn't spoken to my parents since graduation day. They hadn't reached out, and neither had I. Through Uncle Robert, I heard occasional updates. My replaced position in strategy had gone to the son of one of my father's golf buddies. My mother had told friends I was finding myself through a character-building experience, as if I'd joined the Peace Corps rather than a competing financial firm. It hurt, but less than I expected. The distance had given me perspective on just how constrained I'd been by their expectations, how much of myself I'd suppressed to fit their vision of a Lawson heir. For the first time, I was making choices based on what I wanted, not what would earn their approval. Then came the email that changed everything. Emma, need to talk urgently. Not about family drama, business. Can you meet tonight? Uncle Robert. We met at a quiet bar near my apartment. Uncle Robert looked uncharacteristically disheveled, his tie loosened, his normally perfect hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. The board called an emergency meeting today, he said without preamble. They're considering a vote of no confidence in your father's leadership. I blinked, surprised at how quickly things had deteriorated. What happened? The Peterson account walked. $3 billion in assets, gone to Goldman. Your father insisted on maintaining their traditional portfolio split despite their new ESG requirements. Peterson gave us 3 chances to adapt, and your father dismissed all of them as passing fads. Uncle Robert drained half his scotch in one gulp. It was the last straw for the board. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I didn't want to see my father humiliated. Uncle Robert set down his glass with purpose. There's more. Your algorithm, the one you developed at Princeton and have been refining at Hudson Square. The board knows about it. Your performance. Metrics have been circulating among industry insiders. My stomach tightened. How? Miles Zhang has been showcasing your work to potential clients. As he should, it's impressive. But now the board sees it as evidence of what they've been telling your father for years. We need to modernize, incorporate more quantitative approaches, focus on sustainable investing, all the things you were advocating before you left. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very ideas my father had dismissed were now being held up as the solution to the firm's problems. What does this have to do with me? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Uncle Robert leaned forward. The board wants to bring you back, not as an analyst, not in strategy, but as head of quantitative investment strategies, new division they're proposing to create. They see your work at Hudson Square as proof of concept. I stared at him, speechless. It gets more complicated, he continued. There's a faction, led by Victoria Winters, you remember her, who wants more dramatic change. They're considering approaching outside firms for acquisition talks if your father refuses to step back from day-to-day operations. Victoria Winters was a formidable board member who had never particularly warmed to my father's approach. That she was leading this charge didn't surprise me. So what exactly are you suggesting? I asked. I'm suggesting, Uncle Robert said carefully, that you have an opportunity here, not to crawl back to your parents, but to potentially save the firm they built while transforming it into something better. Something that aligns with your vision, not theirs. I sat back, mind racing. They would never accept me in that role. My father would block it out of pride alone. He might not have a choice, not if the alternative is being forced out entirely. Uncle Robert finished his drink. Just think about it. The board meets again next Friday to continue the discussion. As I walked home that night, the autumn air crisp against my face, I felt a storm of conflicting emotions. Vindication, certainly. My approach had been right all along. Concern for the firm that, despite everything, still bore my family name and employed hundreds of people, and buried beneath it all a small, persistent flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could heal the rift with my parents if they could see me as a professional in my own right. By morning, that flicker had hardened into determination. Not to reconcile on their terms, but to build something better than either of us had envisioned alone. I called Miles to my office that afternoon. I need to be completely honest with you, I began, closing the door behind us. I've received an offer from Lawson Capital. Miles's expression shifted from surprise to resignation. Going back to the family business after all? Can't say I'm shocked, though I thought you'd last longer. It's not what you think, I said quickly. They want my algorithm and the work we've been doing here. The board is considering major changes in investment strategy. Understanding dawned in his eyes. So Daddy's company is finally catching up to where we already are. Something like that, I admitted, but I haven't accepted anything. I wanted to talk to you first, both out of loyalty and because I have an alternative idea. Miles leaned against my desk, arms crossed. I'm listening. What if instead of me going back to Lawson, Hudson Square made a play for Lawson Capital? The words rushed out before I could second-guess myself. The board is already considering acquisition offers as a contingency if my father refuses to step aside. We could position ourselves as the ideal partner. Miles's eyebrows shot up. That's ambitious. We're a fraction of their size. In traditional assets under management, yes, I acknowledged. But our growth rate is triple theirs. Our returns are outperforming them significantly. And most importantly, we represent exactly the direction their board wants to go. Quantitative, tech-forward, sustainability-focused. You're serious about this, Miles said, studying my face. Completely. Think about it. Their old money-client relationships combined with our innovative strategies. Their global infrastructure with our technological edge. It's complementary. Miles pushed away from the desk and paced the small office. From a business perspective, it makes sense. But Emma, this is your family's company. Are you sure this is about business and not something else? The question hung in the air. Was this about proving something to my parents? About revenge? I'd asked myself the same thing all night. It's about building something better than either firm could become alone, I said finally. And yes, it's also about showing my parents that rejecting my ideas was the biggest mistake they ever made. Both things can be true. Miles nodded slowly. I'd need to take this to our investors. We'd need significant capital backing. I've already thought about that. What if we approach Victoria Winters directly? She leads the faction pushing for my father to step back. If we get her support, she could help rally other board members. That's devious, Miles said with grudging admiration. And possibly brilliant. Let me make some calls. The next 2 weeks were a blur of secret meetings, financial projections, and strategy sessions. Miles brought in Hudson Square's 3 principal investors, tech industry veterans who had funded the firm's launch 4 years earlier. Victoria Winters agreed to meet us discreetly at her pied-à-terre in Tribeca, away from the prying eyes of my father's loyal officers. She greeted me with the same polite kiss on both cheeks she'd given me at charity galas since I was a teenager, but her eyes assessed me differently now, not as Charles Lawson's daughter, but as a potential solution to her business problem. Emma, darling, you've certainly made waves since your departure. She gestured for us to sit in her impeccably designed living room. Though I must say, your father's reaction was entirely predictable. He never did handle challenges to his authority gracefully. I introduced Miles and outlined our proposal. Victoria listened intently, asking occasional razor-sharp questions about integration timelines and client retention projections. When we finished, she tapped one perfectly manicured nail against her teacup. It's an elegant solution, she admitted. Hudson Square gets instant credibility and a massive client base. Lawson gets the innovation injection it desperately needs. The board gets to save face by presenting this as a strategic partnership rather than an admission of failure. And my father? I asked the question that had been hovering unspoken. Victoria's smile was thin. Charles would remain as chairman emeritus, a figurehead position with no operational control, essentially a graceful retirement. The prospect of my father being forced into a ceremonial role sent a complicated ripple of emotions through me. He would hate it, see it as the ultimate humiliation. Part of me, the part still stinging from rejection, felt satisfaction at the thought. Another part remembered the father who had taught me to ride a bike, who had beamed with pride at my high school graduation. He'll fight it, I said. Not if the alternative is worse, Victoria replied calmly. The board has already commissioned an independent valuation of the firm. The numbers aren't flattering. If Charles forces a vote of no confidence, it becomes public. The stock drops further. His legacy becomes the Lawson who destroyed Lawson Capital. And my mother? I couldn't help asking. Victoria's expression softened slightly. Diana has more political acumen than Charles. She'll adapt to preserve what matters to her, the Lawson name, the social standing. She might even become an ally, given the right approach. I wasn't convinced of that, but it wasn't the central issue. So you'll support our proposal to the board? Conditionally, Victoria said, setting down her cup with precision. I want to see detailed integration plans, client retention strategies, and most importantly, I want assurances about leadership structure. Who exactly would be running this combined entity? Miles and I exchanged glances. We envisioned a power-sharing arrangement, he began. Co-CEOs with clear division of responsibilities. I would oversee technology and operations. while Emma would lead investment strategy and client relationships. Victoria's gaze fixed on me. "You've been in the industry less than a year, Emma. Talented as you are, that's a significant leap." "I was raised for this role," I replied evenly. "I know the business, the clients, the culture. What I lacked was the freedom to implement new ideas. Now I have both the knowledge and the proven track record that my approach works." She considered this, then nodded once. "Prepare a formal presentation for the full board next Friday. I'll ensure you get on the agenda. But," she added, her voice hardening slightly, "be prepared for resistance. Charles won't go quietly, and he still has allies." As we left Victoria's apartment, Miles let out a low whistle. "That was intense. Are you sure you're ready to face your father across a boardroom table while essentially staging a corporate coup?" I thought about my father's cold dismissal of my potential, my mother's casual certainty that I would eventually fall in line with their plans. I thought about the months of struggling alone, rebuilding my life piece by piece while they waited for me to break. "Yes," I said with absolute certainty, "I'm ready." The night before the board meeting, I stood in my small apartment, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I'd bought a new suit for the occasion, not from the designers my mother favored, but a sharply tailored charcoal ensemble that projected confidence without ostentation. My hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant knot. No family jewelry, just small pearl studs that had been a gift from my grandfather. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Robert. "Board dinner. Tonight at Le Cirque. Your father knows something's happening, but not what. Winter's keeping your presentation under wraps until tomorrow. Ready?" I texted back, "As I'll ever be." Another message came through, this one from Miles. "Investors all in. Capital secured. Green light." Everything was in place. Our investors had committed to backing the acquisition. Victoria had quietly secured tentative support from 6 of the 11 board members. The presentation was polished, the numbers solid, the strategy sound. So why did my stomach feel tied in knots? Because tomorrow wouldn't just determine the future of 2 financial firms, it would permanently transform my relationship with my parents. Whether we succeeded or failed, there would be no going back to the way things were. No possibility of a quiet reconciliation someday. No chance they would ever see me as just their daughter again. I was choosing business over family. Exactly what my father had done when he rejected my application, when he put his vision for the firm above his relationship with me. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. I turned away from the mirror and tried to sleep, but rest eluded me. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and went to my small kitchen to make tea. As the water boiled, I found myself looking at the one family photo I'd kept, a beach trip from when I was about 7. Before expectations and disappointments, before I understood that my parents' love came with conditions. We looked happy, normal, connected. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I taking this too far? Was there still a path to reconciliation that didn't involve corporate warfare? Then I remembered my father's cold voice. "If you walk away from this opportunity, don't expect another one." My mother's dismissive words. "If you're adult enough to dismiss our guidance, you're adult enough to support yourself." Completely. They had made their choice. Tomorrow, I would make mine. The Lawson Capital boardroom felt smaller than I remembered. As a child, visiting my father at work, I'd thought it vast and impressive with its mahogany table and views of the Manhattan skyline. Now, standing at the threshold, I recognized it for what it was, just another corporate meeting room, distinguished only by the subtle displays of wealth and tradition that had always been my father's priority. Miles stood beside me, tablet in hand, projector case slung over his shoulder. We'd arrived early at Victoria's suggestion to set up before the others arrived. The presentation was loaded, the handouts prepared, every detail accounted for. All that remained was the confrontation itself. "You okay?" Miles asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We'd prepared for every contingency, every possible objection. But nothing could fully prepare me for seeing my parents' faces when they realized what was happening. Board members began arriving in small groups, their curious glances in my direction confirming that most had no idea why I was there. Victoria entered with 2 allies, giving me a small, encouraging nod. Uncle Robert was among the last, slipping into a seat near the middle of the table, not overtly aligned with either faction. Then my parents walked in. My father stopped, abruptly when he saw me, his expression flickering from surprise to wariness to a forced neutrality. My mother, ever the social tactician, recovered more quickly, her smile professional, though her eyes remained cold. Emma, she said, as if we'd seen each other just yesterday, as if the past 10 months of silence had never happened. What a lovely surprise. My father said nothing, moving to his seat at the head of the table and arranging his papers with deliberate precision. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight clench in his jaw. He knew something significant was about to happen, even if he didn't yet know what. Victoria called the meeting to order with practiced efficiency. Before we address the regular agenda, we have a special presentation. As you all know, the board has been discussing strategic options for Lawson Capital's future growth and technological adaptation. Today, we have a proposal that addresses those concerns comprehensively. She nodded toward me. Emma Lawson, along with Miles Zhang of Hudson Square Capital, will present their vision for a potential partnership between our firms. My father's head snapped up, his gaze boring into mine with an intensity that would have intimidated me once. My mother's perfect composure cracked slightly, her fingers tightening around her pen. I stepped to the front of the room, feeling strangely calm now that the moment had arrived. Thank you, Ms. Winters. Good morning, everyone. As many of you know, I've spent the past 10 months at Hudson Square Capital, leading their quantitative strategies division. Today, we're proposing a merger that would combine Lawson Capital's established client base and global presence with Hudson Square's technological innovation and market-leading returns. For the next 30 minutes, Miles and I laid out our vision, the complementary strengths of both firms, the integration timeline, the projected financial outcomes. We presented case studies showing how my algorithm had outperformed traditional strategies, charts demonstrating Hudson Square's growth trajectory, testimonials from institutional clients who had switched to our firm for exactly the capabilities Lawson Capital was lacking. Throughout it all, my father sat motionless, his expression unreadable. My mother watched with calculating eyes, occasionally exchanging glances with board members she considered allies. When we finished, Victoria opened the floor for questions. They came rapid-fire, probing our assumptions, challenging our projections, testing our resolve. Miles and I fielded them smoothly, our preparation paying off. The momentum seemed to be building in our favor, board members leaning forward with increasing interest. Then my father finally spoke. This is absurd. His voice cut through the room like a blade. Hudson Square is a boutique startup with barely 4 years of operation. Lawson Capital has a 70-year legacy of excellence. The suggestion that we should merge, which is really a polite fiction for selling our identity, is not just premature, it's insulting. He turned his gaze directly to me. Ms. Lawson's personal grudge against this firm's leadership has clearly clouded her judgment, and I'm disappointed that members of this board are entertaining what is essentially an act of revenge disguised as a business proposal. The room fell silent. He'd brought the subtext to the surface, naming the family drama that everyone had been carefully avoiding. I took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd prepared for. This isn't about personal grievances, Mr. Lawson, I replied, deliberately using his formal title. This is about the future of Lawson Capital. The firm has lost 3 major institutional clients in the past 6 months. Returns have been flat or declining for 7 consecutive quarters. The The market is evolving, and Lawson Capital is not evolving with it. I stepped closer to the table, making eye contact with each board member in turn. You all know this. It's why we're here today. The question isn't whether Lawson Capital needs to change, it's whether that change will be reactive and forced, or strategic and controlled. My mother interjected, her voice smooth as silk. Emma, darling, no one disputes that adaptations may be necessary, but surely there are less dramatic options than handing control to external parties. Like what? I challenged. The technology integration plan that's been under review for 18 months? The diversity initiative that never moved beyond press releases? The sustainable investment strategy that was tabled because it might dilute returns? I placed a document on the table, the internal strategic assessment that Uncle Robert had quietly provided. Your own analysis shows that Lawson Capital needs exactly what Hudson Square offers. The only barrier has been a resistance to change that starts at the top. My father's face darkened. This is outrageous. I move that we end this presentation and return to the planned agenda. Victoria stepped in smoothly. Actually, Charles, as chair of the Strategic Planning Committee, I believe this proposal deserves full consideration. Emma, would you outline the proposed leadership structure for this combined entity? This was the most delicate part of our proposal, the aspect most likely to trigger my father's absolute opposition. Miles and I exchanged a quick glance before I continued. We envision a transitional leadership structure, I began carefully. Miles Zhang would serve as Chief Operating Officer and Chief Technology Officer. I would assume the role of Chief Investment Officer. Mr. Lawson would transition to Chairman Emeritus, focusing on key client relationships and strategic guidance, while gradually stepping back from day-to-day operations. The euphemism wasn't lost on anyone. Chairman Emeritus was a retirement position, a graceful exit. I was proposing to replace my father as the effective leader of the firm he'd built. Absolutely not. My father's voice was ice. This meeting is over. He began gathering his papers. Victoria's voice cut through the tension. The meeting is not over, Charles. As you know, the board has authority over major strategic decisions, including leadership transitions. Emma's proposal offers a path forward that preserves the Lawson name and legacy while addressing the firm's urgent need for innovation. She turned to the other board members. I move that we approve further due diligence on this merger proposal, with a final vote to be scheduled within 30 days. My father stood abruptly. This is a coup, plain and simple, and it's being orchestrated by my own daughter, who couldn't even bother to complete a proper training program before deciding she should run the company. Charles, my mother said quietly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. For the first time, I noticed something like concern in her eyes. Not for me, but for him, for the public spectacle he was creating. He shook her off. No, Diana, I won't sit here and watch this betrayal unfold. He looked directly at me, his gaze burning with a mixture of anger and something that might have been hurt. I expected more loyalty from you, of all people. The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. He who had discarded me the moment I deviated from his plan now accusing me of disloyalty. This isn't about loyalty, I said, keeping my voice steady. It's about the future of Lawson Capital. A future that could include both innovation and tradition, if you'd allow it. By removing me from my own company? By conspiring behind my back? He gestured around the table. How long has this been in motion? How many of you have been involved in this plot? Victoria intervened before the situation could deteriorate further. I think we could all benefit from a brief recess. Let's reconvene in 15 minutes. As board members filed out, my father remained standing, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. My mother rose gracefully, her social mask firmly back in place. "Emma," she said, her voice low. "A word, please." She led me to a small conference room adjacent to the boardroom, closing the door firmly behind us. For a moment, she just looked at me, as if seeing a stranger wearing her daughter's face. "Is this really necessary?" she asked finally. "This public humiliation?" "I tried the private approach," I reminded her. "I proposed innovations from within. I was shown the door." "You were offered a position?" "I was offered a token role with no real influence," I interrupted. "And when I declined it, I was cut off completely. So yes, this is necessary, not for revenge, but because Lawson Capital genuinely needs what Hudson Square offers." My mother sighed, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her impeccable suit. "Your father built this firm from what? His father left him. It's his life's work, Emma. Can you imagine what this feels like to him? His own daughter orchestrating his removal?" For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt, of guilt. Then I remembered the cold dismissal in his voice when he'd rejected my ideas, the ease with which they'd both discarded me when I'd refused to conform to their plan. "Can you imagine how it felt?" I countered quietly. "To be kicked out of my home on graduation day? To be told my education, my ideas, my potential meant nothing unless I used them exactly as you prescribed?" She had the grace to look away briefly. "We may have been overly harsh, but we thought you needed to learn independence." "No," I said firmly. "You thought I needed to learn obedience. There's a difference." Before she could respond, the door opened and Miles appeared. "They're reconvening," he said. "Victoria thinks we have the votes." My mother's expression hardened at this confirmation that board members had indeed been consulted in advance. "I see. Well, it seems you've thought of everything." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Just remember, Emma, once you do, there's no going back. Not for the company, and not for this family." I nodded, the weight of her words settling on my shoulders. "I know." When we returned to the boardroom, my father's seat was empty. Victoria informed us that he had left the building, stating he would not participate in what he considered a predetermined coup. The vote proceeded without him. 8-2 in favor of advancing the merger proposal to the due diligence phase, with one abstention. My mother, who sat through the remainder of the meeting in frosty silence. As we gathered our materials after the board dispersed, Uncle Robert approached me. "Well, that went about as well as could be expected. Your father's currently in his club, presumably drowning his sorrows and plotting countermoves." "Will there be countermoves?" I asked. Uncle Robert shrugged. "He still has allies, connections, but Victoria marshaled this brilliantly, and your presentation was compelling. The numbers don't lie. The firm needs what you're offering." He studied me carefully. "Are you okay?" That couldn't have been easy. I wasn't sure how to answer. Professional triumph mixed with personal loss, vindication tangled with regret. "I will be," I said finally. "This was the right move for the company." "And for you?" He pressed gently. I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, the city that had watched me fall and rise again. "I think so, but ask me again when the dust settles." The next 30 days were a whirlwind of due diligence, meetings, integration planning, and legal maneuvers. My father refused to participate directly, communicating only through attorneys. My mother maintained a careful distance, attending required meetings with professional composure, but volunteering nothing beyond the minimum necessary information. Word of the pending merger leaked to the financial press despite our efforts at confidentiality. Lawson Air Stage's comeback with takeover attempt blared the Wall Street Journal. Family feud becomes corporate coup, declared Bloomberg. The stories invariably painted the situation as a Shakespearean drama, the spurned daughter returning for revenge against the patriarchal king. It wasn't entirely wrong, but it wasn't the complete truth either. This was about business as much as it was about family, about bringing a venerable institution into the modern era before it collapsed under the weight of its own traditions. The final vote was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. The legal teams had hammered out the details of the merger agreement, the financial analysts had confirmed the valuation, and the integration teams had mapped out a detailed 18-month plan for combining the two firms. All that remained was formal board approval. The night before the vote, I received an unexpected text from my mother. "Your father would like to speak with you. Privately. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., his office." I stared at the message, surprised and suspicious. Was this a last-ditch attempt? To derail the merger? A plea for mercy? After a moment's hesitation, I replied simply, "I'll be there." Sleep eluded me that night. I rehearsed what I might say to my father, prepared counter-arguments for whatever tactics he might employ, appeals to family loyalty, threats of legal action, attempts to undermine my confidence. By morning, I felt mentally armored for battle. The executive floor of Lawson Capital was eerily quiet when I arrived. My father's longtime assistant nodded to me solemnly as I approached his office. "He's expecting you, Ms. Lawson." The door was heavy beneath my hand as I pushed it open. My father sat behind his massive desk, looking somehow both exactly the same and fundamentally changed. His suit was impeccable as always, his posture rigid with pride. But there was a weariness around his eyes I'd never seen before, a slight slump to his shoulders that spoke of defeat. "Emma," he said, his voice formal but not cold. "Thank you for coming." I took a seat across from him, back straight, expression neutral. "You wanted to speak with me?" He nodded, pressing his fingertips together in a familiar gesture I'd seen thousands of times during serious discussions. "The board votes today. Based on my conversations, the outcome seems predetermined." "Yes," I agreed, seeing no reason to pretend otherwise. He was silent for a moment, studying me with an intensity that might once have made me squirm. Now I met his gaze steadily. "You've outmaneuvered me," he said finally. It wasn't a compliment exactly, but there was a note of something like respect in his voice. Victoria was a strategic ally. Approaching her directly was, well, it's what I would have done. I said nothing, waiting for him to reach his point. "I've spent the past month fighting this merger," he continued. "Legal challenges, calls to major shareholders, appeals to longtime clients. Nothing has gained traction. Your proposal is too sound, the firm's need too obvious, the market conditions too aligned with your vision." His mouth tightened. "You've beaten me at my own game." "This isn't a game," I said quietly. "It's the future of Lawson Capital, a future that apparently doesn't include me." There was bitterness in his tone, but also resignation. "It could," I offered, surprising myself. "The chairman emeritus position isn't just a title. Your client relationships, your experience, those have value, real value, but not if you're using them to block necessary change." He leaned back in his chair, regarding me thoughtfully. "You really believe in this merger? It's not just about—" He hesitated. "Getting even?" I supplied. "No. Though I won't pretend there isn't a certain satisfaction in the symmetry. You rejected me because my ideas didn't fit your vision. Now the board is embracing those same ideas and questioning your vision." "Fair enough," he sighed, running, a hand over his face in an uncharacteristically vulnerable gesture. "I've had a lot of time to think these past few weeks. About the firm, about leadership, about being a father." He met my eyes directly. "I made a mistake, Emma. Not just professionally in dismissing your ideas, but personally, in the way your mother and I handled your decision." The admission caught me off guard. My father wasn't a man who acknowledged mistakes easily, if ever. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked cautiously. Because after today, our relationship changes permanently. You become my boss, effectively. Any personal reconciliation becomes infinitely more complicated. He straightened some papers on his desk. And because, despite everything, you're my daughter, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, even if I wish it hadn't come at my expense. It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get from Charles Lawson. Part of me wanted to cling to my anger, to remind him of every cold word, every dismissal. Another part, the part that remembered beach trips and bedtime stories and his genuine joy at my academic achievements, felt a tentative hope that something might be salvaged from the wreckage of our relationship. The board meeting is at 2, I said, standing to leave. Will you be there? He nodded, his expression resolute. I've never missed a board meeting in 30 years. I don't intend to start now. As I reached the door, he called after me. Emma, whatever happens today, remember that firms change, strategies evolve, but family is permanent, even when it's messy. I paused, hand on the doorknob. I'll see you at 2, Father. The board vote was unanimous. My father, true to his word, attended and cast his vote with the majority, a public acknowledgement that the merger was in the best interests of the firm. My mother followed suit, her expression unreadable, and just like that it was done. Hudson Square Capital and Lawson Capital would become Lawson Strategic Partners, with Miles and me at the helm and my father transitioning to the advisory role of chairman emeritus over a 6-month period. As the meeting concluded and board members offered congratulations, I found myself standing face to face with my parents. For a moment, none of us spoke, the weight of the past year and all that had changed hanging between us. Then my mother surprised me by reaching out to squeeze my hand briefly. Well done, she said simply. My father extended his hand formally. Congratulations, Ms. Chief Investment Officer. I trust you'll prove me wrong about a great many things. I took his hand, feeling the familiar strength in his grip. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Emeritus. I'll do my best. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't reconciliation. But as we stood there in the boardroom where my journey had begun with rejection and now culminated in triumph, I felt something shift between us. A first tentative step toward a new kind of relationship. Not the one they had scripted for me, nor the complete severance I had once imagined, but something we would have to build together, one careful decision at a time. The termination letters I had prepared for them remained in my briefcase, unsigned and undelivered. Perhaps there was a different path forward after all. Not through firing, but through transformation. Not through rejection, but through redefinition. As we left the boardroom together, heading toward the press conference that would announce the merger to the world, I thought about the long journey from that painful graduation day to this moment of professional triumph. I had lost a family as I knew it, but gained a strength I never knew I possessed. I had been cast out, but found my way back on my own terms. Sometimes being kicked out is just the push you need to build something better than you ever imagined. Not just a career, but a version of yourself that no one else could have shaped for you. The press conference announcing the merger was a masterclass in corporate theater. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel filled with financial journalists, industry analysts, and representatives from major institutional clients. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the proceedings, softening the tension that hummed beneath the surface of our carefully orchestrated performance. I stood at the podium, Miles at my right, my father at my left, the three of us presenting a united front despite the complicated reality behind the scenes. Victoria and several board members sat in the front row, their presence a visual reminder of the power structure that had made this merger possible. Lawson Strategic Partners represents the best of tradition and innovation, I told the assembled crowd, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in my stomach. We're combining Lawson Capital's 7 decades of trusted client relationships with Hudson Square's cutting-edge quantitative approach. This isn't just a merger of companies, it's a fusion of complementary strengths. Cameras flashed as I outlined our vision for the future. Sustainable investing principles backed by algorithmic precision, global reach enhanced by technological agility, traditional wisdom amplified by data-driven insights. The narrative we presented was compelling, coherent, and completely devoid of any mention of the family drama that had sparked it all. When my father stepped up to speak, I held my breath, unsure what version of Charles Lawson would emerge. The bitter patriarch who had fought the merger behind the scenes, or the strategic leader who had ultimately voted for it. "Change is inevitable in our industry," he began, his authoritative voice filling the room. "The firms that thrive are those that recognize when evolution is necessary." He glanced at me briefly before continuing. "Lawson Capital has always been a forward-looking institution. This partnership with Hudson Square represents our commitment to remaining at the forefront of financial innovation for generations to come." It was a graceful performance, betraying none of the struggle that had preceded it. If anyone in the audience sensed the underlying tension, they gave no indication. The questions that followed focused on technical aspects of the merger, integration, timelines, and market positioning, the very business fundamentals that had made our proposal irresistible to the board despite the personal complications. As the event concluded and we moved to the reception area for individual interviews, a reporter from the Financial Times approached me, recorder in hand. "Ms. Lawson, there's been speculation about family dynamics influencing this merger. Care to comment on how it feels to essentially become your father's boss after he reportedly refused to hire you last year?" I felt my father stiffen beside me, though his expression remained neutral. This was exactly the narrative we'd been trying to avoid, the personal vendetta angle that undermined the business logic of our merger. Lawson Strategic Partners was created because it makes profound business sense, I replied smoothly. Our complementary capabilities create value greater than the sum of our parts. As for reporting structures, we're implementing a collaborative leadership model that leverages everyone's strengths. I smiled professionally. Family relationships are private matters. We're here to discuss the future of financial services. The reporter pressed on. But surely there's... "If I may," my father interjected, his tone pleasant but firm. "My daughter has always had exceptional strategic vision. The board recognized that value unanimously. This transition is about positioning Lawson for the next 70 years of excellence." He placed a hand briefly on my shoulder, a gesture that would read as supportive to observers, though I could feel the slight tension in his fingers. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have clients to speak with." As we moved away, I murmured, "Thank you for that." His response was equally quiet. "It wasn't entirely for your benefit. Some narratives serve neither of us." The reception continued for another hour, a delicate dance of professional smiles and careful answers. My mother circulated among longtime clients, smoothing ruffled feathers and reassuring the old guard that the firm's core values remained intact despite the changes in leadership. Miles charmed the tech-focused analysts with promises of algorithmic transparency and data-driven insights. Uncle Robert acted as a bridge between the traditional Lawson contingent and the Hudson Square innovators, his easy manner helping to blend the distinct corporate cultures. By the time we finally departed, darkness had fallen over Manhattan, the city lights glittering through the hotel windows like stars. In the privacy of the town car taking me back to my apartment, I finally allowed myself to exhale fully, the tension of the day seeping from my shoulders. My phone buzzed with a text from Miles. "We did it. This is just the beginning." I smiled, typing back, "See you tomorrow for day 1. Another message appeared, this one from Uncle Robert. "Your grandfather would be proud. He always said the firm needed someone who could see around corners." The mention of my grandfather, the original visionary behind Lawson Capital, whose portrait still hung in the main conference room, brought an unexpected lump to my throat. I'd never known him well, but family lore painted him as a maverick, a risk-taker who built the firm through bold moves during volatile markets. Perhaps there was something of him in me after all. A final text came through as the car pulled up to my building. Dinner, Sunday, the house, 7 p.m. Mom. No congratulations, no commentary on the day's events, just a characteristic directive. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Sunday dinner had been a weekly institution throughout my childhood, a formal affair regardless of who was present. My absence from those dinners over the past year had been conspicuous. My empty chair a physical manifestation of the rift between us. After a moment's hesitation, I typed, "I'll be there." The integration process began in earnest the next morning. We'd secured temporary office space in a midtown high-rise, neutral territory that belonged to neither firm, for the transition team. The space hummed with activity as HR representatives from both companies worked to align compensation structures, IT specialists mapped out technology integration plans, and marketing teams debated the visual identity of our newly combined entity. Miles and I moved between working groups, addressing questions and resolving conflicts as they arose. The cultural differences between the firms were immediately apparent. Hudson Square's staff skewed younger, more diverse, more casual in their approach, while Lawson employees tended toward formality and deference to hierarchy. Creating a blended culture that preserved the best of both worlds would be one of our greatest challenges. By mid-afternoon, we'd scheduled our first joint, town hall for later in the week, and approved preliminary communications to clients and vendors. I was reviewing departmental integration timelines when Victoria appeared at my office door, elegant as always in a tailored navy suit. "You've had quite a week," she observed, taking a seat across from my desk without waiting for an invitation. "How are you holding up?" I set aside the documents I'd been reviewing. "It's been intense, but productive. The teams are working well together so far." Victoria nodded, though her penetrating gaze suggested she was looking for more than surface-level updates and the personal aspects. "Your father seems to be adapting to his new role with more grace than I anticipated." "Publicly, yes," I agreed cautiously. "And privately?" I hesitated. Victoria had been an essential ally in making the merger happen, but I was still determining where various loyalties lay in our new corporate structure. "We're finding our way," I said finally. "It's complicated." "Family always is," she replied with a knowing smile, "especially when billions of dollars and public reputations are involved." She leaned forward slightly. "A word of advice, if I may? The next 6 months are critical, not just for the merger, but for your leadership position. Many are watching to see if you're truly ready for this role, or if you've simply leveraged family connections to accelerate beyond your experience." The assessment was blunt but accurate. Despite our careful messaging about complementary strengths and strategic fit, plenty of industry observers viewed the merger as either nepotism or revenge, neither interpretation establishing me as a serious financial leader. "What do you suggest?" I asked, genuinely interested in her perspective. Victoria hadn't reached her position on the board without navigating complex political waters successfully. "Deliver results early," she said without hesitation. "Find a signature initiative that demonstrates your vision in action. Something that combines Lawson's traditional strengths with Hudson Square's innovation. And," she added with emphasis, "manage your father carefully. Charles is accustomed to control. His public support is valuable, but watch for subtle undermining. He may not even realize he's doing it." I nodded, appreciating her candor. "And my mother?" Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Diana is more pragmatic than Charles. She cares about appearances, legacy, social standing. Give her victories she can showcase at charity galas, and she'll become an advocate rather than an obstacle." After she departed, I sat quietly, considering her advice. The personal and professional were so thoroughly entangled in this situation that separating them seemed impossible. Every business decision carried family implications. Every family interaction had corporate consequences. Sunday arrived more quickly than I anticipated, the intervening days consumed by integration meetings, client calls, and press interviews. I found myself standing on the doorstep of my parents' Upper East Side townhouse, a bottle of wine in hand, feeling strangely like a visitor rather than a returning daughter. The housekeeper who answered the door, not Maria, who had been with the family since my childhood, but someone new, led me to the formal living room where my parents waited. The space was exactly as I remembered. Tasteful antiques, strategic, art investments, family photos curated to project success and harmony. Only now I noticed what had been edited out. Pictures of my college graduation were conspicuously absent, the timeline of family history neatly skipping from high school. Achievements to my brother's wedding last year. My father stood by the fireplace, tumbler of scotch in hand, while my mother arranged herself perfectly on the silk brocade sofa. Neither rushed to embrace me. "Emma," my mother said, her tone polite but distant. "You look well. That suit, is it Armani?" "Theory, actually," I replied, handing the wine to the hovering housekeeper. My mother's slight frown at the more modest designer label was exactly what I'd expected. Some things never changed. "How are the integration teams progressing?" my father asked, skipping social pleasantries entirely. "On schedule," I answered, accepting a glass of white wine from the housekeeper. "The technology migration plan is ambitious but feasible. Client retention looks strong so far." He nodded, his expression giving away nothing. "Harrison Winthrop called me yesterday." He seemed concerned about changes to his portfolio management team. Harrison Winthrop was one of Lawson Capital's oldest and wealthiest clients, a man of my father's generation who viewed financial advice as a gentleman's agreement rather than a data-driven service. His account was significant, but his investment approach was outdated, relying more on personal relationships than market fundamentals. "I'm meeting with him next week," I said. "We're not changing his primary relationship manager, just adding quantitative support to strengthen his portfolio. Construction." My father swirled his scotch thoughtfully. "Harrison doesn't trust algorithms. He trusts people he's played golf with for 30 years. "Then I'll explain our approach over golf," I replied evenly. "The numbers speak for themselves. His returns will improve with our blended approach, and that's what matters." "Is it?" my mother interjected, setting down her wine glass precisely. "Relationships matter in this business, Emma. Trust built over decades. Your father's generation values personal connection over performance metrics. Which is exactly why we're not dismantling those relationships," I explained, maintaining my composure. "We're enhancing them with better tools. The clients get the best of both worlds. The advisor they trust, armed with superior analytics." My father made a non-committal sound, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Before the conversation could continue, the housekeeper announced that dinner was served, and we moved to the formal dining room. The meal proceeded with stilted conversation about neutral topics, the weather, an upcoming charity gala, my brother's new house in Greenwich. We carefully avoided any mention of the previous year's estrangement or the dramatic boardroom confrontation that had preceded our merger. It was as if we'd all tacitly agreed to pretend the rupture had never happened, focusing instead on the public narrative of strategic business evolution. As dessert was being served, my mother finally broached the subject that had clearly been on her mind. "The Pearsons' anniversary party is next Saturday. They've asked specifically if you'll be attending." The Pearsons were fixtures in my parents' social circle, old money with significant philanthropic influence. Their events were strategic networking opportunities disguised as social occasions. "I hadn't planned on it," I admitted. "The integration timeline is demanding right now. You should reconsider." my mother said, her tone making it clear this wasn't merely a suggestion. People are curious about the merger, about your new role. The narrative needs managing, Emma. Better to do it proactively in social settings. Then let speculation run wild. She wasn't wrong. The financial press had been full of thinly veiled references to family drama and generational power struggles, despite our careful messaging. Perhaps a united front at key social events would help redirect focus to the business fundamentals. I'll check my calendar, I conceded. My father, who had been mostly silent throughout dinner, finally spoke. Your mother's right about the narrative. Management. Perception matters in our world, perhaps more than it should. He set down his fork deliberately. Which brings me to another matter, the chairman emeritus role. I tensed slightly, wary of where this might be heading. The transition plan we'd presented to the board prescribed a gradual reduction in my father's operational responsibilities over 6 months, with a focus on client relationship management and strategic advising rather than decision-making authority. What about it? I asked carefully. I've been thinking about how to make this work effectively, he said, his tone businesslike. The press releases make everything sound seamless, but the reality is more complex. Clients who have worked with me for decades are confused about who they should call with questions. Staff who have reported to me for years are unsure about the new chain of command. My mother nodded in agreement. The organizational uncertainty is creating anxiety. Structure and clarity would benefit everyone. I set down my wine glass, suddenly alert to what felt like a coordinated approach. The transition plan addresses this with clear timelines and communication protocols. What specifically are you suggesting? My father leaned forward slightly. A more defined division of responsibilities. I would maintain full autonomy over the firm's legacy client relationships, the top 50 accounts that represent 60% of our assets under management. You and Miles would lead the innovation initiatives, technology integration, and new client acquisition. Clean lines, clear authorities. The proposal sounded reasonable on the surface, but I immediately recognized it for what it was: an attempt to carve out a protected fiefdom within the merged entity, effectively creating 2 parallel firms under one banner. It would undermine the entire purpose of the merger, preventing the cross-pollination of traditional methods and innovative approaches that was central to our vision. That's not what the board approved, I said evenly. The integration plan is comprehensive specifically because our strategy requires blending capabilities across all client segments. Compartmentalizing would defeat the purpose. My father's expression hardened slightly. The board approved a general framework. Implementation details are management decisions that should reflect operational realities and client preferences. Like the preference of certain clients to maintain the status quo rather than adopt approaches that would improve their returns, I challenged. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. My mother set down her dessert fork with a delicate clink that somehow conveyed profound disapproval. This is exactly why your father's continued leadership with key clients is essential, she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge. They need reassurance that their relationships won't be sacrificed to algorithmic experiments, regardless of projected returns. I took a measured breath, recognizing the familiar dynamics at play. This wasn't really about organizational structure or client preferences. It was about control. About my father's reluctance to truly cede authority, about my parents' instinctive resistance to change, particularly change initiated by their daughter. I understand your concerns, I said carefully, but creating parallel systems would undermine our integration goals and confuse both staff and clients. Instead, let's create a more robust client transition protocol, with you personally introducing key relationship managers to the enhanced capabilities our merger brings. That preserves continuity while still moving everyone forward. My father studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I had effectively rejected his proposal while offering an alternative that acknowledged his concerns, a negotiation tactic I'd learned from watching him throughout my childhood. "I'll consider it," he said finally, neither accepting nor dismissing my counter-proposal. "We can discuss the details at the office." The rest of the evening passed without further mention of business matters, though the underlying tension remained. As I prepared to leave, my mother walked me to the door, adjusting my scarf with the automatic gesture of a woman accustomed to managing appearances. "This transition is difficult for your father," she said quietly. "More than he'll admit. 40 years building something, only to step back. It takes a toll." For the first time that evening, I heard something genuine in her voice, a hint of the protective concern she felt for her husband beneath the polished social veneer. "I know," I acknowledged. "But the firm needs to evolve. He knows that too, even if he doesn't like the form that evolution is taking." She searched my face for a moment. "And us? This family? How do we evolve, Emma?" The question caught me off guard. My mother rarely ventured into territory this emotionally direct. Before I could formulate a response, she continued, "I've made dinner reservations for just the two of us next Thursday. Café Boulud, 1 o'clock. We have things to discuss that are better addressed without your father present." Intrigued and slightly wary, I nodded. "I'll be there." The next week brought a flurry of integration milestones. We announced our new executive team structure, combining talent from both legacy firms. We unveiled the visual identity for Lawson Strategic Partners, a modernized version of the traditional Lawson Capital logo, signaling evolution rather than revolution. We held our first joint town hall, with Miles and me presenting a united vision while my father made a brief appearance to endorse the changes. Behind the scenes, the work was messier. Cultural integration proved challenging, with longtime Lawson employees resistant to Hudson Square's more collaborative approach. Technology systems fought against compatibility. Middle managers jockeyed for position in the new hierarchy. Through it all, my father maintained a careful public supportiveness, while subtly reinforcing his indispensability with key clients and board members. He accepted the chairman emeritus title but continued operating much as he always had, attending critical meetings, weighing in on strategic decisions, maintaining his corner office with its commanding view of Central Park. I monitored these dynamics closely but chose my battles carefully, focusing on securing early wins that would demonstrate the merger's value. Our first blended investment approach, applying Hudson Square's algorithms to Lawson's municipal bond strategy, showed promising initial results. Several institutional clients responded positively to our enhanced reporting transparency. The press coverage began shifting from familial intrigue to business innovation. By Thursday, when I arrived at Café Boulud for lunch with my mother, I felt cautiously optimistic about our professional progress, if still uncertain about our family dynamics. My mother was already seated when I arrived, immaculate as always in a Chanel suit, her hair perfectly arranged, her makeup subtle, but flawless. She was studying the wine list with the serious attention she gave to all social particulars, however minor. "The Sancerre is excellent here," she said by way of greeting as I slid into the chair across from her. "Though perhaps you'd prefer something else? Your tastes may have changed this past year." The comment could have been purely about wine. Preferences, but the subtle reference to my year of independence and the suggestion that I might have developed new preferences during that time wasn't lost on me. "Sancerre is fine," I replied, setting my phone face down on the table. "You said you wanted to discuss something?" My mother signaled the sommelier before answering. Only after she had ordered the wine and dismissed the hovering server did she turn her full attention to me. "Your father is struggling," she said directly. "More than he shows. This transition, it's not just about the company for him. It's about identity, purpose, legacy." I nodded, unsurprised by this opening. "I understand that. But the firm, needed to change, with or without me as part of that change. The market was demanding it. Perhaps, she conceded, but the manner of the change matters, Emma. The public narrative, the private dynamics. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the tablecloth. Your father built that firm from what his father left him, a respectable but regional operation, into a global institution. It's been the center of his existence for 40 years. I know, I said, a hint of frustration creeping into my voice. You've both made that clear since I was old enough to understand what Lawson Capital was. The firm always came first. The firm was the legacy. The firm was the priority. My mother's expression sharpened at my tone. Yes, it was. And that prioritization created the opportunities you enjoyed your entire life. The education, the connections, the foundation from which you launched your own career, even in opposition to us. The sommelier returned with our wine, pouring small tastings for each of us. My mother sampled hers with practiced precision before nodding her approval. I sipped mine without really tasting it, too focused on the conversation to appreciate the vintage. When we were alone again, I leaned forward slightly. Why are we having this lunch, Mother? To remind me of all I owe to the family business? To persuade me to give Father more control in the merged company? She set down her glass carefully. In part, she admitted, but also to help you understand something you may have missed in your focus on algorithms and innovation. Lawson Capital. Now, Lawson Strategic Partners isn't just a business. It's a social institution, a network of relationships built over generations. Those relationships require maintenance, cultivation, personal attention. I'm well aware of the importance of client relationships, I countered. Not just client relationships, she corrected. Social relationships, philanthropic relationships, political relationships, the invisible connections that protect and advance our interests. Your father has spent decades building and maintaining those networks. They can't be replaced by algorithms, no matter how sophisticated. I considered her words, recognizing the truth in them despite my instinctive resistance to anything that sounded like a defense of the old guard. The world my parents operated in, the charity boards, the museum galas, the private club memberships, did represent a form of influence and access that couldn't be easily quantified or replicated. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked. My mother took another sip of wine before answering. A more nuanced transition. Your father maintains his role as the firm's public face with key social constituencies. You focus on modernizing our investment approach and operations, a true partnership that leverages both strengths. And in this arrangement, who makes the final decisions? I pressed. The slightest smile curved her lips. Whoever has the strongest case for their position, of course. That's how partnerships work. She reached across the table unexpectedly, placing her hand briefly over mine. Emma, contrary to what you might believe, neither of us wants you to fail. We want this merger to succeed. We want Lawson Strategic Partners to thrive. We simply believe that honoring tradition while embracing innovation is better than discarding decades of accumulated wisdom in pursuit of the newest trends. The touch was so uncharacteristic that it momentarily disarmed me. My mother had never been physically demonstrative, preferring verbal direction to emotional connection. This small gesture suggested a sincerity I hadn't anticipated. I don't want to discard accumulated wisdom, I said, softening slightly. I want to enhance it with new capabilities. That's been my position from the beginning, even before I left Lawson Capital. Then perhaps we're more aligned than recent events would suggest, she replied. The question is whether we can find a path forward that preserves your father's dignity while still achieving your vision for the firm's future. As we moved on to ordering lunch, discussing safer topics like the upcoming spring gala season and my brother's new consulting project, I found myself considering my mother's words more seriously than I might have expected. Beneath the social niceties and careful phrasing, she had offered something like an olive branch. Not a surrender, certainly, but an acknowledgement that collaboration might be possible if managed correctly. The real question was whether my father shared this perspective, or if my mother was engaging in her own form of corporate diplomacy, independent of his position. The coming weeks would reveal which version of the truth was operational. As she signaled for the check, my mother made one final comment. "The Pearsons' anniversary party on Saturday. Your father and I would appreciate if you attended. Arrive. With us, as a family. It would send the right message." I hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll be there." Small steps, I reminded myself. The merger of two companies was proving complex enough. The reconciliation of a family might require even more careful integration. The Pearsons' anniversary celebration at the Metropolitan Club was exactly as I remembered such events. Crystal chandeliers illuminating a sea of designer evening wear, white-gloved servers circulating with champagne and canapes, conversations conducted at precisely the right volume to be heard by intended participants and no one else. It was a world operating on social codes I had absorbed since childhood, but had gratefully abandoned during my year of independence. I arrived with my parents as agreed, our town car pulling up to the entrance at exactly 8:15, fashionably. Late but not rudely so. Another calculation my mother made instinctively. As we entered the grand ballroom, I felt the subtle shift in attention, conversations pausing momentarily as guests registered our united appearance. The message was received exactly as my mother had intended. Whatever business restructuring might be happening at Lawson Strategic Partners, the family itself remained intact. My father led the way through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations on the merger as if it had been his idea all along. Strategic evolution, he called it to one gray-haired investment banker. Positioning ourselves for the next generation of financial markets, he explained to a curious hedge fund manager. Not once did he refer to the boardroom confrontation or the power struggle that had precipitated the changes. In Charles Lawson's revised history, the merger was simply a natural progression, a thoughtful adaptation to changing market conditions. My mother glided alongside him, the perfect corporate spouse, adding warmth to his authority with her practiced social grace. She introduced me repeatedly as our brilliant Emma, who's spearheading our quantitative strategies division, a description that acknowledged my role while neatly avoiding any mention of my actual position as his effective superior in the new corporate structure. I played my part in this carefully choreographed performance, discussing market trends with board members of other financial institutions, outlining our vision for Lawson Strategic Partners to curious peers, accepting compliments on the merger's execution with appropriate modesty. It was exhausting but necessary, this dance of appearances that my mother had correctly identified as crucial to our firm's social positioning. Midway through the evening, I found myself momentarily alone at the edge of the ballroom, watching the intricate social mechanics unfold before me. My father was deep in conversation with Harrison Winthrop and several other legacy clients, his hand gestures indicating he was explaining something complex but reassuring. My mother had positioned herself strategically near the guest of honor, ensuring the Lawson family's close association with the celebrating couple would be noted by all attendees. "Quite the united front," observed a voice beside me. I turned to find Victoria Winters, elegant in midnight blue, champagne flute in hand. The financial press would be disappointed to see such family harmony after speculating about corporate patricide for weeks. "Mother's idea," I admitted. "She's always understood the importance of perception management." Victoria nodded approvingly. Diana is a master strategist in her own right, just on different battlefields than Charles. She took a measured sip of champagne. "The question is whether this is merely theater or the beginning of a genuine recalibration of family dynamics." I watched my father laugh at something Harrison said, his public persona fully engaged. Probably somewhere in between, I replied honestly. We're finding a new equilibrium. It's complex. Family businesses always are, Victoria agreed. Which is why most don't survive the transition to second-generation leadership. The emotional entanglements complicate rational decision-making. She studied me carefully. You're navigating it well so far. The early integration metrics are promising. You've seen the reports? I asked, surprised that board members were already reviewing our preliminary data. Charles shared them with several of us yesterday, Victoria explained. He seemed particularly pleased with the municipal bond strategy performance, called it a promising example of complementary methodologies. I felt a flicker of surprise, followed by cautious optimism. My father had been notably silent during our management review of those same results, offering neither criticism nor praise for the blended approach I'd championed. That he would highlight the success to board members suggested a shift, however subtle, in his assessment of our integration strategy. The combined approach is showing exactly the benefits we projected, I said, keeping my tone measured despite my internal reaction. Traditional market expertise enhanced by algorithmic pattern recognition. The municipal bond portfolio is just the first implementation. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. It's a compelling proof of concept. If you can replicate those results across other asset classes, the merger narrative shifts from family drama to business brilliance. She glanced toward my father, still holding court with his longtime clients. Charles recognizes that, even if his pride makes acknowledgement difficult. Before I could respond, my mother appeared at my elbow, social radar having detected a potentially significant conversation. "Victoria, darling, you look stunning," she said, kissing the air near the board member's cheek. "I've been meaning to speak with you about the hospital fundraiser next month. We're hoping you'll join our table again this year." The conversation shifted seamlessly to charitable obligations and upcoming social events. The business discussion dissolved into social niceties. But Victoria's words lingered in my mind as I rejoined the broader celebration, mingling and networking as expected of a Lawson heir at such gatherings. By the time we departed shortly after midnight, I had spoken with dozens of industry figures, reinforced key client relationships, and performed the public unity my mother had orchestrated. As our car pulled away from the club, my father loosened his bow tie with a sigh of relief that spoke to the effort such performances required, even for someone as practiced as himself. "Productive evening," he remarked, staring out at the Manhattan streets sliding past the window. Harrison seems reassured about the transition. The Goldmans less so, my mother observed. Margaret was asking very pointed questions about account management changes. "I'll call her on Monday," I offered. "Walk her through the integration plan, personally." My father nodded, surprising me with his lack of territorial response. Just weeks earlier, he would have insisted on managing the Goldman relationship himself. This small concession, allowing me to handle a legacy client interaction without his direct involvement, felt like a meaningful shift. "The municipal bond results helped," he said after a moment, still looking out the window rather than at me. "Concrete evidence that the blended approach has merit." It was as close to direct approval as he had offered since the merger began. A grudging acknowledgement that my vision for integrating traditional expertise with quantitative methods was yielding tangible benefits. "We're seeing similar early indicators in the emerging markets portfolios," I replied, careful not to sound triumphant. "The algorithm is identifying patterns human analysts were missing in currency fluctuation data." He nodded again, offering no further comment, but also no resistance. My mother, ever attuned to the subtle currents of emotion between us, skillfully redirected the conversation to safer territory. The quality of the Pearsons' champagne selection, the upcoming symphony gala, my brother's planned visit next month. When the car stopped outside my apartment building, my father surprised me again. "The quarterly client review is next Thursday," he said as I gathered my clutch and wrap. I think you should lead it. I'll be there, of course, but it's time clients see you as the firm's future." I paused, momentarily caught off guard by this unexpected ceding of territory. The quarterly review was traditionally his showcase, a ICE carefully orchestrated demonstration of his command over market trends and investment strategies. "If you're sure," I said cautiously. "It's the right next step," he replied, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time that evening. "Just don't screw it up." The words were gruff, but the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth suggested something almost like humor beneath the directive. As I entered my apartment, kicking off uncomfortable heels and unzipping the designer dress I'd purchased specifically for the occasion, I found myself contemplating this small but significant shift. Was it progress toward genuine acceptance of the new reality, or merely strategic adaptation to circumstances he couldn't change? With my father, the line between pragmatism and reconciliation was never entirely clear. The following weeks brought a series of similar modest breakthroughs. My father began including me in meetings with long-standing clients he had initially shielded from the transition. He contributed constructive suggestions to our integration initiatives rather than subtle resistance. During one executive committee discussion, he even publicly acknowledged that a proposal from the Hudson Square technology team represented an improvement over Lawson Capital's legacy systems. These incremental shifts in his approach coincided with increasingly positive results from our integrated strategies. The municipal bond portfolio continued outperforming benchmarks. Several institutional clients increased their allocations after seeing our enhanced analytics capabilities. The press narrative gradually evolved from speculation about family power struggles to analysis of our innovative approach to wealth management. My mother's influence in this evolution wasn't immediately obvious, but became increasingly clear. She orchestrated a series of social occasions where my father and I could interact in controlled public environments: charity committee meetings, cultural events, small dinner parties with trusted friends. These settings allowed us to practice new patterns of interaction to establish a professional respect that might eventually rebuild personal bridges. The quarterly client review became a pivotal moment in this recalibration. Standing at the podium in our largest conference room, addressing 50 of the firm's most significant clients, I presented our investment outlook with the confidence of someone raised to eventually assume this role. The slides reflected our blended approach: traditional fundamental analysis enhanced by algorithmic pattern recognition, human expertise amplified by technological capabilities. My father sat in the front row, occasionally nodding as I addressed. Questions about market volatility, inflation projections, and portfolio allocation strategies. When a particularly skeptical client challenged our shift toward quantitative methods, he rose smoothly to support my response. "Simon, I understand your concern," he said, addressing the long-standing client by first name. "I had similar questions, initially. But the evidence is compelling." He gestured toward the performance charts displayed on the screen. "Our combined approach is delivering superior risk-adjusted returns across asset classes. Emma and her team have implemented these changes with careful attention to the fundamental principles that have always guided Lawson investments." The endorsement was measured but genuine, offering both reassurance to concerned clients and public acknowledgement of my leadership. It represented a careful balance, supporting the new direction without diminishing his own legacy, embracing evolution without admitting previous resistance. Later that evening, as the executive team celebrated the successful client event with drinks at a nearby restaurant, Miles leaned close to speak privately. "That was significant," he observed, nodding toward my father at the other end of the table, engaged in conversation with our chief compliance officer. "6 months ago, he was fighting us at every turn. Now he's defending our approach to skeptical clients." I sipped my martini thoughtfully. He's adapting. The results help. It's hard to argue with performance numbers. And Mother has been strategic in managing the transition. Miles raised an eyebrow. She's been orchestrating this reconciliation all along, hasn't she? The social appearances, the gradual reintegration of family dynamics with business operations. In her way, I agreed. She's always understood the interconnection between personal relationships and business success better than either my father or I wanted to admit. As if sensing our discussion, my mother glanced in our direction from her position near my father, offering a slight smile that acknowledged her awareness of our analysis. Diana Lawson had always possessed an uncanny ability to read a room, to track multiple conversations simultaneously, to sense shifts in allegiance or attitude before they became explicit. The gathering continued late into the evening, professional, boundaries softening as wine flowed and the team celebrated our early successes. By the time we dispersed, a new sense of cohesion had emerged. Not complete integration, but movement toward a shared identity that honored both legacy and innovation. Walking back to my apartment in the cool night air, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 18 months. From the painful rejection on graduation day to the corporate coup in the boardroom to this evolving detente, none of it had unfolded as I'd expected. The clean revenge narrative I had briefly imagined had given way to something messier, but ultimately more constructive. A genuine business partnership that might eventually heal family wounds rather than deepen them. The quarterly earnings. Announcement the following week confirmed what our internal metrics had been suggesting. Lawson Strategic Partners was outperforming both predecessor firms across key indicators. Assets under management had grown 7% since the merger. Client retention exceeded projections. The integrated investment strategies were delivering returns that surpassed industry benchmarks by measurable margins. The board meeting, to review these results, had none of the tension that had characterized our earlier confrontations. Victoria opened with a direct acknowledgement of our success. The numbers speak for themselves. This merger is delivering exactly what was promised. Complementary strengths creating superior outcomes. My father, seated now at the side of the table rather than at its head, nodded in agreement. The integration is proceeding more smoothly than I anticipated, he admitted, glancing briefly in my direction. The client feedback has been predominantly positive, even from those initially resistant to change. We proceeded through the quarterly reports methodically, noting challenges and opportunities with professional objectivity. Only once did a hint of the old tension surface, when discussing the transition timeline for my father's remaining operational responsibilities. The 6-month plan we initially outlined is approaching completion, I noted, bringing up the transition schedule on the presentation screen. Most functional areas have successfully transferred to the new reporting structure, with the exception of key client relationship management for our legacy ultra-high net worth individuals. My father straightened slightly in his chair. Those relationships require careful handling, he said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. Many of these clients have worked exclusively with me for decades. Rushing the transition could jeopardize significant assets. Before I could respond, my mother intervened smoothly from her observer's seat along the boardroom wall. Perhaps what we need is a more nuanced approach than the original timeline suggested, she offered. These relationships represent both business assets and personal connections. The transition should respect both dimensions. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. A valid point. Emma, what are your thoughts on modifying the approach? I considered the question carefully, aware of all eyes on me, particularly my father's. 18 months earlier, I might have insisted on rigid adherence to the original plan, viewing any deviation as capitulation. Now, with the merger's success providing security, I could afford greater flexibility. I agree that relationships of this nature deserve special consideration, I said finally. I propose we extend the transition period for these specific clients, implementing a co-management approach where father and I work together with each relationship until the client feels comfortable with the new structure. The tension in my father's posture eased visibly. That's A reasonable accommodation, he acknowledged. Victoria smiled approvingly. Excellent. A thoughtful compromise that prioritizes client comfort while still advancing our integration goals. She glanced between my father and me. This kind of collaborative problem-solving is exactly what we hope to see in the merged leadership team. The meeting concluded with unanimous approval of our quarterly results and modified transition plan. As board members gathered their materials and prepared to depart, my father approached me directly. "The co-management approach," he said quietly. It was a good suggestion, better than what I had in mind. "Which was?" I asked, curious about the alternative he had been prepared to propose. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Indefinite delay of any transition for those relationships. Not particularly realistic, in retrospect. "Probably not," I agreed, returning his smile cautiously. But the concern behind it was valid. These clients trust you personally, not just the Lawson name. He nodded, gathering his portfolio with deliberate movements. They'll learn to trust you, too. You've earned that, with the results you're delivering. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. Your grandfather would have approved of what you've built here. He was an innovator in his time, though in different ways. The comparison to my grandfather, the firm's revered founder, whose portrait still dominated the main conference room, was perhaps the highest compliment my father could offer. It acknowledged not just my professional competence, but my legitimate place in the Lawson legacy, something he had questioned so fundamentally on my graduation day. Thank you, I said simply, knowing that anything more effusive would make us both uncomfortable. He nodded once more before turning to leave. As he reached the door, he glanced back. Sunday dinner. Your mother's planning something elaborate. 7 o'clock. The invitation, or instruction, was delivered in his typical direct manner, but the context transformed its meaning. This wasn't obligation or performance. It was continuation, a recognition that our professional realignment merited personal reconnection as well. I'll be there, I promised. The Sunday dinner that followed marked a subtle but significant shift in our family dynamics. My brother and his wife joined us, providing additional social buffer. My mother had indeed prepared something elaborate, a multi-course meal featuring family favorites rather than impressive showpieces for business associates. The conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years, touching on business matters but not dominated by them. My father, more relaxed in the family setting than I had seen him since the merger, actually asked about my apartment renovations, a subject he had previously dismissed as irrelevant. My mother inquired about Miles and the Hudson Square team, members who had transitioned to the merged firm. My brother shared amusing stories from his consulting projects, drawing parallels to challenges we were facing in our integration efforts. It wasn't perfect reconciliation. Too much had happened for that. But it was genuine engagement, a willingness to build something new from the fragments of what had shattered on graduation day. As we finished dessert, my father surprised us all by raising his wine glass in an uncharacteristic toast. To Lawson Strategic Partners, he said, his voice carrying the gravitas that had defined his leadership for decades. And to the next generation of leadership. His gaze met mine directly, acknowledging without reservation what he had so fiercely resisted. My rightful place at the helm of the family business. My mother raised her glass immediately, her expression softening with what might have been pride. My brother followed suit, adding, "About time you admitted what we all knew, Dad." The moment passed quickly, dissolving into comfortable conversation about summer plans and industry gossip. But its significance lingered, a milestone. In our evolving relationship, not just as business associates, but as family, 3 months later, we celebrated the merger's 1-year anniversary with a formal event at the New York Public Library. The grand space filled with clients, employees, industry peers, and financial press. all eager to hear from the leadership team that had executed one of the most successful financial services integrations in recent memory. Miles and I opened the proceedings with a presentation highlighting our combined achievements: growth metrics, performance results, technological innovations, client satisfaction scores. The numbers told a compelling story of complementary strengths creating something greater than either firm could have achieved independently. When my father took the podium for his remarks, the audience quieted expectantly. Charles Lawson's evolution from merger opponent to public advocate had become something of a legend in financial circles, though few knew the full personal dimension of that transformation. "A year ago," he began, his authoritative voice filling the space. "I was skeptical about the direction Lawson Strategic Partners proposed to take. I valued tradition, stability, proven methods. I questioned whether quantitative strategies and technological innovation were compatible with the personalized service our clients expected." He paused, surveying the audience with the confident gaze of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I was wrong," he continued simply. "The results of our integrated approach speak for themselves. By combining Lawson Capital's deep market experience with Hudson Square's innovative methodologies, we've created something truly distinctive in the financial landscape." Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. My father acknowledging error publicly was unprecedented, a gesture that carried profound weight with those who knew him well. "But perhaps more importantly," he added, his voice softening slightly, "I've learned that wisdom isn't exclusive to any generation. That innovation and tradition need not be opposing forces. That sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from unexpected sources." His gaze found mine in the audience, conveying a message meant for me alone despite the public setting. Not quite an apology for the rejection that had started our journey, but an acknowledgement that his assessment had been fundamentally flawed, both of my potential and of the path the firm needed to take. As the event concluded and guests mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres, I found myself standing beside my parents near one of the library's grand windows. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glittered against the night sky, a fitting backdrop for this milestone celebration. "Well," my mother said, smoothing her already perfect dress with practiced hands, "I believe we can consider the merged entity successfully launched, both professionally and socially." Her tone was light, but the glance she exchanged with my father carried deeper meaning, acknowledgement of the complex journey we had navigated together. "The transition has been educational," my father admitted, swirling the scotch in his glass thoughtfully. "Not always comfortable, but ultimately valuable." "For everyone," I agreed, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the celebration unfold around us. The Hudson Square team. Members now moved easily among Lawson veterans, internal boundaries dissolving as our integrated identity strengthened. Miles chatted animatedly with several board members, his innovative vision now embraced rather than viewed with suspicion. Victoria observed it all with the satisfied expression of someone whose strategic gamble had paid off handsomely. "You?" "No," my father said finally, his voice uncharacteristically reflective. "When I removed you from consideration for the analyst program, I thought I was protecting the firm from what I perceived as untested ideas. In reality, I was protecting myself from the uncomfortable recognition that the world was changing around me." The admission, the closest he would likely ever come to apologizing for the rejection that had sparked our confrontation, hung between us, significant in its rarity. "And when you kicked me out?" I asked quietly, the question that had lingered unspoken through our gradual reconciliation. He sighed, meeting my gaze directly. "Pride. Wounded pride and fear that I was losing control of the firm, of the family, narrative, of you. Not my finest moment." My mother placed a hand lightly on his arm, a gesture of support rather than restraint. "We both handled things poorly," she acknowledged. "We were so focused on the path we'd envisioned that we couldn't see the stronger alternative you were proposing." "Well," I said after a moment, raising my glass slightly, "here's to learning from mistakes, all of ours." My father nodded, touching his glass to mine in acceptance of this diplomatic framing of our shared history. "And to Lawson Strategics Partners," he added. "May it continue to evolve under leadership worthy of its potential." The compliment was understated but genuine, offering final confirmation of how far we had traveled from that painful graduation day confrontation. The termination letters I had once imagined delivering remained unwritten, replaced by something more valuable. A transformed relationship built on professional respect that might, with time and continued effort, heal the personal wounds as I moved back into the celebration, accepting congratulations and discussing future strategies with key clients, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought us here. What had begun as rejection had forced me to prove myself, independently, to build skills and confidence I might never have developed under my father's direct supervision. The very adversity that had felt so devastating had ultimately created the foundation for something stronger. Not just a more innovative firm, but a more resilient self. Sometimes being kicked out is the beginning rather than the end. Sometimes, the path to genuine leadership requires leaving the safety of predetermined tracks. And sometimes, family businesses need upheaval before they can truly evolve, shaking foundations to build something stronger in their place. The merger I had engineered hadn't resulted in firing my parents as I had briefly imagined in my most wounded moments. Instead, it had created a more complex but ultimately more valuable resolution, a genuine partnership that honored experience while embracing innovation, that respected legacy while creating space for new vision. Not revenge, but renewal. Not rejection, but reconstruction. A transformation more complete and satisfying than simple termination could ever have provided. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.